All right, good morning. It's nice to see you all like in person and like normal. I feel so like naked. I have my mask like right here. I don't know if anyone else is like that. I've been trying to push myself when I go to like the store. And then yesterday I took my mask off in my classroom for the first time, but I can't like not bring it with me. So I've just been carrying it around like my little safety blanket. But
when I feel comfortable with
right. My kids were like, the second they didn't have to wear a mask, they like threw them off, they burned them in like a fire. Like I swear it was just like, get rid of it. I'm like clinging to it for whatever reason, but I'm going to, I brought it, but I'm not going to wear it. So we'll see. I know. And I keep expecting, you know how it was at the beginning where it was like, you don't need a mask. Now you need a mask. Then you don't need a mask. Now you need a mask. And I'm like, well, we keep waiting for them to decide that we need it again. But we'll see. And I feel better. I think I sound better. I don't know how long it'll take me to be like 100%, but I definitely feel better. So I'm really hoping the rest of the way we have no more interruptions and we can have a nice, smooth last fourth of our class here. We're not really behind at all. We're still kind of right on schedule. So we'll start with chapter 13 today. We have stress and health. I'm sure stress is a topic none of you are at all familiar with right now, right? Stress and health, and then we'll look at disorders, therapy, and then social psychology. So those will be the last topics that we'll cover. And so those are the things that we'll look at over this last. We only have, if you look at it, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 classes left, and then the semester is over. So that's wild. That's not much at all. It's going to go really, really quickly. But again, we'll talk about this today. It's kind of a short unit. It'll take us like a day to go over. We'll talk a little bit about stress and stressors, how it affects our body, and some of that kind of stuff. Yeah. Say that one more time. Sorry.
Be here in person.
No, so the final will be just like every other test that you've had. I'll let you take it online. So if I put it on the syllabus, so the final is Wednesday, May 11th, and the final is just a 4th exam. So it's just on this last unit. So it'll be on chapter 13, 14, 15, and 16. So it's not cumulative at all. It's just another test, and it'll be on Canvas, and you'll do that online and everything. The only other thing that you'll do is you'll do a little closing assignment, which is worth 25 points. So you'll do a little essay where you'll reflect back over the class rather than me giving you a cumulative test. That's my cumulative component. So you can think about it and write it at home instead. And then we have a couple of participations left that we'll do, and then that last exam, and then we'll be done. Hard to believe, but feels like a long time ago that we started and we were online, and which feels forever ago. But anyway, we'll talk about this a little bit today. And again, I'm sure you're all very familiar with stress. This has probably been some of the more stressful years for a lot of people. Stress is something that's interesting. It's a physical state, but it's also a lot of it is psychological as well. It's a state of tension or strain, but it's also the way that we kind of perceive and respond to things in our life that we call stressors, which are on the next slide that we'll get to. And stress has a lot to do with how we view an event or appraise an event. Two people can experience the exact same event, and one person might be stressed out by it and another person not so much, right? We all kind of have our tolerance for stress, our buttons of things that stress us out. And there is a whole branch of psychology that looks at stress and how stress affects health and illness and well-being and so on. And those are health psychologists. And there's a couple of other little branches in here that we'll talk about as well. But again, stress is something that's very normal, right? We all experience stress. It can be helpful, it can be motivating, but too much stress can also be a little bit damaging. Right? So we'll talk about that as well. I have a little video that introduces the idea of what is stress, but let me talk about one more slide and then I'll play that for you. As I said, a stressor can be anything: a test, technology, COVID, health, traffic, right? Everyday hassles, little events, right? Anything can stress us out, right? And as I mentioned earlier, it's more about the way that you perceive something than the actual event. So traffic doesn't stress me out too much because I'm always ridiculously early to everything. So I leave way too much time And so typically traffic doesn't bother me. I'm like, I'll just listen to some fantasy football radio, or I'll make some phone calls and it doesn't bother me. My partner, on the other hand, like in traffic is just like freaking out and yelling at people. Sometimes my kids will start yelling at people and I'm like, that's your mom right there, right? Like, what are you doing? I'm like, oh, you've heard that before. Huh? But we all have our things that bother us, right? And those are called stressors. And as I mentioned, stress can be really good, right? If you have an exam, the stress of an exam might push you to study, which will help you to do better. But too much stress and you might be crippled by that during the exam. And you can't think clearly and you have a hard time focusing. So it's a little bit of a balance. And as I said, I have this little video that kind of introduces what is stress and how it affects our bodies. So let me play that for you, and then we'll come back and talk about it more. It tends to be a problem, right? And it does affect our body quite a bit. And I'm sure you've all experienced that, right? When you're really stressed out, you get headaches, you might get stomach aches. I get a lot of like muscle tension. Like I don't realize I do it, but I clench my jaw and it gives me headaches. A lot of people get migraines. There's a bunch of things that stress can do to your system. And again, it can be caused by literally anything. And so what we'll look at just a little bit is how our body tends to respond when we're stressed out. We won't get into it in great detail, but I do think it's important to see that it has an effect on us physically. And think about the emotions that we talked about a few weeks ago. Every emotion comes with a physical component, right? So when you're stressed or anxious, you are going to feel that in your body to some degree. And it starts with a little structure called the hypothalamus. The hypothalamus, and I have a little image of it here, right, is a tiny, tiny little part of the brain that kicks into gear whenever there's a stressor, right? So any kind of threat, an exam, it could be something much more like immediate or even more like dangerous, but any kind of stressor or threat, the hypothalamus is going to activate a couple of different systems in your body. It activates the nervous system and the endocrine system, and it causes some bodily responses to occur. When we have that hypothalamus kick into gear, it activates the sympathetic nervous system, which we talked about maybe a month or two ago, which is in charge of fight or flight. And sometimes we say freeze as well, fight, flight, or freeze. But it kicks us into gear here, arousing our system, right, and preparing us to meet that stressor or face that threat, or maybe run away from that stressor or that threat. And then once the threat or stress has subsided and gone away, the parasympathetic nervous system calms us down, in charge of resting and digesting, which sounds much nicer than fight or flight. But whenever we're stressed out, we get things like epinephrine and norepinephrine, adrenaline, cortisol. We get all of these different hormones and neurotransmitters that are released into our system. And that's what makes us feel those effects of stress, feel jittery or nervous or have our heart beat faster, our palms start to sweat, give us headaches, stomach aches, all that kind of stuff. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
What are responsible for the butterflies?
Yes, that's part of it. Okay, so the adrenal glands, right, are controlled by the endocrine system. So they release hormones into your bloodstream, hormones like cortisol and a few other ones. The butterflies in your stomach is more caused by norepinephrine. So what happens when we're stressed out is we release all this norepinephrine, which causes blood flow to be rerouted from our stomach. It literally pulls the blood out in a way of like preparing us to have be ready to mobilize our resources. And that shrinking of the blood away from like the gut causes that like very fluttery feeling that we call butterflies in the stomach. And so when you feel that, it's more controlled by like the nervous system and norepinephrine, but it's directly related to the actions of the adrenal glands and the hormones as well. But very common, right? When we're stressed, you get that fluttery butterflies in the stomach feeling from norepinephrine. Another way of looking at this, just another kind of proposal, a psychologist named Hans Saley talked about something called the general adaptation syndrome, that we go through 3 different stages as we respond to stress. And these directly relate to what we just talked about. But whenever there's a stressor, it's like an alarm goes off in our system. That alarm reaction you could think about as like the hypothalamus being activated, and it's going to kick into gear resources that allow us to resist or fight off the stress. Norepinephrine, adrenaline, cortisol, all of those things that we just talked about. We mobilize our resources both physically and also like psychologically. And if we beat the stressors, great. And if not, we go into exhaustion. So we talked a lot about things like headaches and stomach aches and like the effects of being exhausted. It literally could just be that you are exhausted and tired from stress, right? When we deplete all of our resources and we weren't able to fight something off, we can feel literally worn out and exhausted and drained just from trying to battle through stressors. So we tend to have this approach that like stress isn't that big of a deal. But when we have it all the time and it never goes away, it can take some tolls on our system. It can cause us to have a bunch of different issues, which we'll talk a little bit about here in a second. It has a wonderful acronym of GAS, right? General Adaptation Syndrome. That helps you to remember it. So long-term stress, this isn't short-term stuff. So like you have an exam, it's not going to cause you to have like these issues, right? But people who suffer from like long-term chronic stress and they don't do anything to battle it or control it are more prone to getting sick. They're more prone to heart disease and heart issues like high blood pressure, and maybe making you more vulnerable to things like heart attacks and coronary heart disease. I have really, really high blood pressure. I always have, right? And part of that is stress and part of it is diet. I think I ate like 50 Cadbury eggs this last weekend. It was glorious. It was amazing, right? Like everybody gave me Cadbury eggs and they're just like, well, I don't want to be rude. So I ate them all. So some of that is obviously diet, but the more stress that you have, the higher your blood pressure tends to be. If you have norepinephrine and adrenaline running through your system, your heart's beating faster, which creates a higher blood pressure, can make you more vulnerable to heart problems. You also tend to be more likely to get sick, right? Whenever it's finals week, and we won't be taking our test in person, so we won't hear it. But during finals week, it's like everybody's always coughing and sniffling because you have so much stress and it's taking such a toll on your system that you can't fight off the physical threats that would cause you to become ill. And there's a whole branch called psychoneuroimmunology that focuses on that relationship between the immune system and stress. And we know that when all of that energy is going to fighting off stressors, we're more vulnerable to illness, right? Your energy in your body is limited. And so if it's going to fighting off stress, then you have less ability to fight off bacteria and other things that could cause you to become ill. Now, I want to be really clear. Stress does not cause AIDS or cancer. But what it can do is accelerate the rate at which they progress. So oftentimes when people have cancer, managing stress is a big part of their treatment plan, right? If we can lower your stress, your body will fight it off or kind of keep it at bay a little bit better. People who have really a lot of stress progress faster from HIV to AIDS. There are things like shingles that pop up in our system when we're stressed out. So stress can trigger a lot of illnesses to emerge or make them progress faster if you aren't able to keep it in check. And again, on a much smaller level, it can cause things like headaches and ulcers and migraines and all sorts of little things like that as well. Any questions or thoughts or anything before we keep going, just to check? So we are mainly focused on like usual typical stress, but I do want to mention one or two examples of extreme stress. Now, I'm sure a lot of you have heard of PTSD, right? Post-traumatic stress disorder. This is the result of somebody who's experienced an extreme stressor, which we could also call a trauma. And how many of you know someone who has PTSD or had PTSD at some point? Right. Several of you. Any like comments or descriptors on what did it come from or what does it look like? Any stories or thoughts or anything? Yeah, a little bit back here.
So I was born too early. I didn't get enough blood in my brain,
Mm-hmm.
and there's a bunch of machines in me.
Sure.
So it caused a lot of problems, the baby.
Okay.
Affects like my learning and how it functions.
Okay, right. And so some of that physical from being born premature, but then some of from the effects of trying to treat that, right? Okay. Interesting. Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
The part signature, and she got in like the prize thing one time that she got some moment, and I could just tell in her face that she got so scared at that moment, and I felt so bad because I was just an accident, but like I could tell that that's triggered her.
Yeah.
So,
I love that you're like, I felt so bad when you're laughing. Right, yeah, I mean, but it triggered that response from the. Okay. Yeah, and if you've ever been in an accident, right, so a car accident is a really good example to talk about this, right? How many of you have been in a car accident at some point? Even a little one, right, just someone even like rear-ending you. So anytime we experience something like that, that could be considered trauma, right? Like a car accident can be traumatic. And sometimes people who have car accidents respond like that when there's any kind of little like trigger that might remind them. My partner got in a car accident, gosh, it's been 10 years ago. She was going straight through a light and somebody turned left, like illegally on a green light and like, boom, just hit her. And so every time she goes through an intersection, I see her go like this, like she like hunkers down. And it's been like 10 years. Whether I'm driving or she's driving or whoever's driving, that kind of response is normal, right? If you've been in a car accident, maybe when you go through that area or you're in that air, like that zone, or like it's that time of day, you might think about it a little bit. Somebody who has PTSD might not get in a car again, right? Or maybe they get in a car at like great expense, right? It causes them so much anxiety that they can't relax. Very common with this that people avoid whatever it was that caused the trauma. So if it was in a car, they might not want to get in the car. If something bad happened at night, they might not go out at night. And I worked with a client years ago when I was training to be a therapist who was attacked at night in her car, right? She was going to get in her car and someone attacked her. And she didn't go out at night anymore because she was so afraid it would happen again. And that's really common with PTSD. Someone experiences something traumatic, which can be anything you experience is traumatic. And then you almost have it haunt you. I think that's a good way to think about it. You think about it all the time. You might have flashbacks or dreams about it. You tend to avoid anything that would remind you of it. Sometimes people get really angry or they're on edge and hypervigilant. This originally was called shell shock syndrome, and it came from combat, right? People who would go off to war would come back with these symptoms, but we've since expanded it to be anyone, right? It can be anyone who experiences something traumatic. But the stereotype of this is like a firework goes off or a car backfires and somebody is like reacting to that. They're sweating, their eyes are big, and they're kind of having that panic from a combat situation. But again, it can be literally anything if you experience it as being traumatic. Anybody else or a lot of other hands? Yeah, sure.
This is like something about like a car accident a while back,
Sure.
like with a family member or something like that. And then once they grow up, they consider to not drive at all. Would that be considered as a post-traumatic stress disorder? They would get in the car, but they wouldn't want to drive themselves.
It could be they need to have like, so that would qualify as like avoiding anything that reminds you of the incident. They'd have to have a couple of other symptoms too, but that could be part of it for sure. Let's say they have dreams about the car accident or like flashbacks of it. It intrudes on you in some way. If they had a few other things, then sure, yeah, that could be one presentation of it. Sure. Anybody else or a couple other hands? Any other stories or comments or anything? Yeah.
It physically I was fine, but
Yeah.
I think the most traumatic thing about it was that I remember what was happening before, during, and after. I think because I sometimes like it still affects me today. I was driving here and like it was like really gripping like the steering wheel, and I sometimes wish that I wish the car accident was bad enough where I couldn't remember it, but like that's not the case. And so like I just have to deal with it.
Yeah.
So, and one of the trauma responses that I had to it, it's kind of a bit scary, but it's getting better. So after this was my second car accident. Last year, my first car accident, we got T-boned, and we were both fine, but when I got home to shower, like I was like alone in the room, I could sense a presence. I was scared of opening the door to the room next to me because I could see, like, I don't know if I would consider it a vision, but like I would imagine like my dead body just standing there, maybe, or at the time, my boyfriend, like I would see his body,
Mhm.
and I would like see it everywhere. And then this, like, it eventually went away. But with this recent car accident, I could feel those presence. I could feel that presence again, but this time I couldn't put a face to it.
Hmm.
I could just see, I could just feel someone watching me. It like it made me, I'm already afraid of the dark. And so like I could, whenever like I'm in my room alone, I could feel that whatever it is, like standing in the corner or something. And it's going away. I just didn't know what it was.
Sure.
Response and
Yeah.
just trying to get it.
That's scary. That sounds scary, right? I've seen too many scary movies. I'm like, that sounds scary. But yeah, we all react differently to trauma, right? And like a trauma response could be, feeling something or seeing something that isn't there. That's very common with PTSD. It could be avoiding a situation, having a hard time sleeping. That sounds like, things that you're experiencing. And a lot of people do go to therapy for this. It's the only way to work through it. So PTSD, there's a couple of these things. There's PTSD, right? And PTSD is kind of like the long-term reaction. So people with PTSD, it lasts at least a month. For most people, this lasts years, right? And it might last for a very, very long time. There's also something called AS, which is acute stress disorder. And this is really, really common. And I always think about it, and this might sound insensitive, I'm just trying to help you remember it. It's just a cute little stress disorder. It's much smaller, right? It doesn't last as long. This is really common after people have something traumatic, like a car accident, or maybe being attacked, or something happens to you. This tends to go away within like a month or two, right? And so this is a very like short-term reaction that you would expect. If something bad happened to you, you're gonna react to it, right? That's normal. But for some, it can kind of transition into something that's much, much longer, which we would call PTSD, right? And working through it in therapy or through a variety of different methods can help it to go away. And that's really common for people to do. There's one other one just to mention. I don't know if any of you have heard of CPTSD. The C stands for complex, right? So I'll write that here, complex post-traumatic stress disorder. And this is somebody who has like ongoing trauma, typically related to childhood. So it's often related to like childhood neglect or ongoing childhood trauma or even ongoing adult trauma. So PTSD is usually like one event. CPTSD is chronic, right, or complex. It tends to last longer. And it's something that can be a little bit harder to treat because it wasn't a one-time incident. So there's actually a variety of these, but PTSD is kind of the more well-known one. And then there's a shorter version of it, and then one that's a little bit more complicated and complex related to ongoing trauma. Yeah.
It's an obviously disorder. So like, do people throughout their life, do they have like little spurts of like watching experience like PTSD trauma right now? Sure. Or is it like you know what I mean? Like the whole time.
It can be right. So it could be something that maybe on your day-to-day life, like you're fine, but something happens that triggers you, and then it might be right there. So let's say you got into, I don't mean to harp on car accidents, but let's say you got into a car accident at night when it was raining. You might have no problem getting in the car during the day, but the second that it's raining at night, all of that might become activated. Maybe it's raining and it's nighttime, you might have dreams about it, flashbacks about it. So it doesn't have to be all the time. It's very often brought on by triggers. Maybe there's a certain sound or smell, time of day. When those things come up, they might trigger that response. And over time, it usually fades quite a bit, especially if you've gone to like therapy or done something to address it. But it is something that can persist for people for a very long time. I had a friend, gosh, this is when I was in college. We worked at Starbucks together. It's like 15 years ago. And she had been attacked, or she was a little bit older than me. She was a police officer for years. Somebody attacked her from behind, broke her collarbone, and it led to her like no longer being a police officer. And I didn't know this about her when I first met her. And I came up behind her. I couldn't get her attention. She had a headset on. And I kept saying her name, and she didn't respond. So I touched her on the shoulder to get her attention. not knowing that that's exactly what this guy who had done before he attacked her and broke her collarbone. So I grabbed her shoulder. We were friends. I thought it was fine. And she whipped me around over her knee, threw me on the floor, and nearly broke my wrist. Just like wild look in her eyes. Like she wasn't even present. And I have tiny little wrists. I was like screaming. I'm like, oh, I just wanted to know about grande cups or something stupid, right? I'm on the ground, like crying. I'm like, don't hurt me. And you could see her come out of it. But that's that like hypervigilance. Sometimes people who have PTSD, it's like they're on edge all the time. They can't relax. Everything makes them a little bit jumpy. And that's very, very common with this disorder. Yeah. Yeah. Okay.
And it shows like your PTSD and like what she doesn't.
What's it called? The woman in the window?
It's.
Sure.
The woman next door.
Okay. Interesting. Okay. I always think of The Punisher. I don't know if any of you have watched that. Like that was a great show as well. He had PTSD, got flashbacks all the time. There's a lot of like movies and shows and things that feature this. I have an example. This one's related to trauma. If you've seen the movie American Sniper, the main character goes off to trauma. He comes back. He's like hearing the sounds of war, even though he's not there. He's very on edge. So I'll play this for you. There's a spot at the end where it looks like he's going to like attack the dog. Nothing happens. I just want to let you know in case you were worried, just to give you that warning. Let me just pause that. Kind of like on edge, right? He reacts like way too much to that dog situation. That's that hypervigilance. It's kind of an edge piece. Then you also see him really withdrawn. Right? Oftentimes people who have this, right, end up kind of in their head. He hears the sounds of combat, even though he's not in them anymore. That's kind of that persistently re-experiencing the event. That's really, really common with this. Again, the flashbacks, dreams, thinking about it in some way. And that's really a very kind of hallmark of this. I always think about it, again, as it haunts you. It just won't leave you alone. It kind of sticks with you for a long time, lasting at least a month, though oftentimes much, much longer. There's a really interesting book, and I read this, maybe like 9 months ago or so. I'm going to write it up here. But it's a really interesting book about how stress affects the body. It's called The Body Keeps the Score. Right. Really interesting book about PTSD and like CPTSD. It's by, I always spell this guy's last name by Bateman. Not the easiest read, but it talks about how stress affects our system, and then quite a bit about kind of the long-term effects of stress. So really interesting related to this. I'll just put that up there as kind of like a side note recommendation if you want to know more. But again, we're focused more on like regular kind of typical stress, but I do think that this is worth noting as kind of an extreme stress example. When it goes, going back to kind of usual stress, when it comes to coping with our stress, we can kind of take one of two paths. We can directly cope or we can defensively cope, right? And when we directly cope with our stress, we make an intentional effort to attack it or confront it directly in some way. We can confront the stressor and try and deal with it. We can find ways to compromise. Sometimes people even remove themselves from stressful situations. I see this so much at this point in the semester where we have like 4 weeks left and people stop coming to class or they stop participating. They remove themselves from the stress. And I always want to be like, you're so close, just hang in there, because we are so close. But it's a very common thing. A lot of people, when they're stressed out, they might pull away and remove themselves from it. You might directly tackle it. Again, you might compromise in some way. Sometimes when we don't even know what's bothering us, we use things like defense mechanisms, right? We are in denial or we try and rationalize something away. Very common, right, that people who don't have the ability to tackle something head on might kind of deceive themselves with defense mechanisms as a way of coping with and handling their stress. The key with stress is to find ways to deal with it constructively. Now, we don't always do that, right? A lot of us, myself included, give in to like poor strategies. I eat when I'm stressed out, or I clean. I tend to organize everything. Like I'll just start cleaning my office so that everything's neat and organized. And then I sit there and eat, right? Some combination of the two. My partner tends to go to sleep, right? Everybody kind of has their own thing. What are some of the ways that all of you deal with your stress? It doesn't have to be healthy, like I won't judge you, but what are some of the ways that you deal with your stress? Was that a hand? No. Oh, I thought, I got excited. You moved. Yeah. Sleep. Yeah. Right. Nothing can bother you because you're asleep. Right. It's really common. A lot of people go to sleep when they're stressed. Yeah. Yeah.
Or going for a drive or something, like doing something to exercise myself.
Yeah. Keeping active or distracting you in some way. Great. Yeah. Did you have one? I use humor and sarcasm as well. Okay. I like that. Right. To try and diffuse it in some way. Okay. Yeah.
Maybe to look up like some breathing exercise on YouTube or something,
Okay.
or
Right, and I'm glad you mentioned it. A lot of people do, and it's like it's common, right? A lot of people either use a substance of some kind to help them calm down. The first one is a very healthy one too, right? And so it's okay. You just want to balance it. Yeah.
Do my laundry, I'll end up doing the dishes and I'm like, oh, great, well, something got.
Okay, so you do something else instead. Okay. I like to make lists. I'll make a list of all the things stressing me out so that I can make one at a time. My partner watches a lot of TikTok when she's stressed out. Like, oh no, because she's just on her phone for like 3 hours watching TikTok. I'm like, what are you doing? She's like, I'm stressed. So I'm watching TikTok. And I'm like, you're avoiding it. Let's go. Right. And then I end up watching TikTok with her. But finding things to do, whether it's exercising or distracting yourself, or sleeping, trying to compromise is a good one, right? Like I'll do the dishes and then maybe I'll get to the laundry. Or if I do the laundry, okay, then I can reward myself with this, right? If I get my paper done, then I can whatever, right? Or I'm gonna go get a cake to eat my cake while I work on my paper. That's mine, right? I'll go to the store and get a cake and be like, all right, grading time, but I've got a cake. That's a good compromise. Cake makes everything better for me anyway. But finding little ways to cope with your stress is important. If you ignore it, it tends to build up. And then can become even more problematic for people. Yeah.
So if someone is stressed, and they're using their comfort activity to help them calm down. I feel like there would be different exceptions to do this, but like at what point would you try and help them confront that feeling?
Sure.
What they're stressed about.
Rather than avoiding it.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think, for some people, they avoid it and avoid it and avoid it. And, it's the essence of procrastinating, right? I'm going to avoid it until I have no choice because the pressure is now helping me, right? Anyone in here, procrastinators, right? I saw a lot of you nodding like, right? Like it's due tomorrow. So I'm going to wait all the way until like 2 a.m. and then I have no choice but to do it. For some people, that's motivating and it works. For other people, that's crippling. Like for me, that last minute stress, I don't do that well. Like I'd rather have it done 3 weeks ahead of time, turned in, and I have nothing on my plate. Other people, it's like, why would I worry about it now? It's not 3 weeks, right? And so I think it's really individual, right? And for some people, they need more time to kind of let themselves take a break. And others, it can go too far, right? Like, okay, well, you've taken a break for 3 hours and now you don't have time to do it anymore. And so I think it's just trying to find that balance, right? And if somebody is avoiding it, then at some point you might have to deal with that a little bit, right? Was that thought I saw a hand over here. Yeah.
Like how, like avoiding it and like going, like doing it right away. Could people if they're avoiding it, can they change their habits to do it?
Oh, yeah. For sure. Right. I have some things that I tend to avoid and other things that I'm like, I'll attack that right now. Right. If I have laundry to do, you mentioned laundry, like forget it. I'll avoid that until like I can't go to bed until I do it. Right. I'll procrastinate on that. But schoolwork, I'll do it right away because I want it off my plate. So it could be that you change. It might depend on the stressor. You might develop better strategies for sure. It can change constantly. A few other things that tend to influence how you cope with stress. Control. This one's really individual for people. Sometimes when you have no control over something, it might make it the most stressful thing in the world because you can't do anything about it. For others, having no control over something makes it completely unstressful. Well, it's out of my hands, so it just is what it is. That totally depends on the person, right? I had a teacher in graduate school who didn't give A's. She told us at the beginning of the semester, I don't give A's. I've never given an A. I refuse to give A's. None of you will get an A, like on and on and on and on, right? I was a straight A student. I never received anything less than an A. And I still haven't received anything less than an A. So I was the first A that she got, and I was so obnoxious. I'm like so obnoxious, and she hated me for it. I guarantee she hated me. I'd go to her office like every day and be like, what else do you need me to do? What else do I need to do on this? What else? Like, oh, I was so annoying. I'm sure. Thinking about it now as a teacher, it probably drove her nuts. But for me, that was like the most stressful thing in the world, that she said, there's nothing you can do. I'm not giving you an A, right? To me, that just put me in a world of stress, because I was like, I refuse to accept that. My classmates were like, okay, well, I'm not getting an A. I'm just going to let that go, right? So it kind of depends on the person, but sometimes control can play a piece. Like I said, I did get an A in the class, probably the only one she's given in a very long time. I'm very proud of that. Even if she hated me, I didn't care. I got an A. Your explanatory style can also matter. Are you optimistic or pessimistic or maybe even realistic, right? Like if you had to view the glass as half empty or half full, or maybe it just is half. It's kind of like the roundabout answer. If somebody asks you, is the cup half empty or half full? It just is. Very philosophical of you. But if you view things as looking on the bright side versus like the negative, that can play a big role as well. Along with how much support you have, right? Do you have other people you can lean on when you're stressed out? Do you have people who help you? Do you have others you can talk to? Or are you on your own? But I have a really fun, I think it's a fun clip related to explanatory style. Again, the idea that your perspective matters on stress. And so there's a little Pixar animated short called Boundin'. It's definitely older, but I think it's such a great example of how the way that you view an event can completely change it. And I'll let you know it's kind of catchy, so I'm sorry if you have it stuck in your head the rest of the day. But I do think it's a really good example of what that can look like. So let me bring it up. Oops, just keep clicking on things. Yes. There we go.
Here's a story on how strange is life with its changes, and it happened not long ago. On a high mountain plain where the sagebrush arranges a playground south of the snow, lived a lamb with a coat of remarkable sheen. It would glint in the sunlight all sparkly and clean, such a source of great pride that it caused him to preen. And he'd break out in high step and dance. He would dance for his neighbors across the way. I must say that they found his dancing enhancing, for they'd also join in the play.
Can you imagine if you were driving by and you said, like, what's going on with the wildlife? I'm sorry, I should keep these things to myself. But I just imagine driving and seeing this going like, oh, okay. Anyway, sorry.
Then one day, then a-bounding up the slope came a great American jackalope. This sage of the sage, this rare hair of hope, caused to pause and check out the lamb. Hey kid, why the mope? Well, I used to be something all covered with fluff, and I'd dance in the sunlight and show off my stuff. Then they hauled me away in a manner quite rough and shared me and dumped me back here in the buff. And if that's not enough, now my friends all laugh at me because they think I look ridiculous, funny, and pink. Pink? Pink? Well, what's wrong with pink? Seems you got a pink kink in your think. Doesn't matter what color, that gets nope. Be it pink, purple, or heliotrope. Now, sometimes you're up and sometimes you're down. When you find that you're down, well, just look around. You still got a body, good legs and fine feet. Get your head in the right place and hey, you're complete. Now, as for the dancing, you can do more. You can reach great heights. In fact, you can soar. You just get a leg up and you slap it on down, and you'll find you're up in what's called a bound, bound, bound and rebound, bound, and you're up right next to the sky, and I think you can do it if you gave it a try. First get a leg up, slap it on down. So every year, long about May, they'd load him up and they'd haul him away, and they'd shave him and dump him, all naked and bare. He learned to live with it. He didn't care. He just bound, bound, bound and rebound. Now in this world of ups and downs, so nice to know there are jackalopes around.
All right. Super catchy, right? Like I feel like it's gonna be stuck in my head for the rest of the day. But I love that he can't control that event, right? Like it's gonna happen every year. And so adjusting the way that he thinks about it, find it really quickly, that's totally fine. All right, let me see if I can find it. All right. Go to Canvas. All right. Where are you? Huh. Okay, I think I found it. Okay.